Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the almost famous sideshow KoR After Hours, where we offer only the finest of the finer things. Starring panelist Kai Norellin, special guest Kazari Iwakura, and I'm your host, Jaster Lane Wynn. Now let us take you behind the doors and show you the madness behind the magic. Alright guys, but I guess now we can go into one of me and Kaz and Kai, you got anything you want to share or deliberate about before we go into what we consider more important stories that have a lasting impact on the phenomenon?
Not really, to be honest. I'm just sitting here listening to, you guys, talk about all this stuff because, like I said, I've never really, done any deep dives into any of this stuff, so a lot of what you're saying is, kind of news to me, but
Fair enough.
I have one brief story to tell before we get into
we can get
before
into
we kind of get
your
into the big
encounter.
ones. So we're going to lean back on the BFRO again. I just want to really quickly claim the BFRO are not the end-all be-all of Bigfoot research. They're one of the more organized efforts out there.
Mm-hmm.
They're the more human effort out there, I believe, because
And
they're also big.
They're also the more visible effort because, finding Bigfoot was on TV and that had a tie to BFRO. Shout out to Bobo, by the way.
Yeah, dude.
He's a real one.
To death. They had him on one of my favorite podcasts, Sasquatch Chronicles. Give them a shout out.
So
go ahead, I apologize.
My story is not as crazy as any of Jaster's because I do live like in a forested area, but it's not like Appalachia. I've had some weird stuff happen here in my neighborhood, but it's not related to this. So when I was a little Babby Kazari Jr., I was in 5th grade. So every year, our school would take the 5th grade class to this wilderness camp called Camp McDowell. I don't know where the fuck in the state it is, but it's just this big old camp out in the middle of nowhere where they teach kids about, ecology and nature and shit.
Mm-hmm.
My group, this was late in the afternoon, early in the evening, a little bit before dinner, I want to say. We had some free time, so we were off down by the riverbank, just kind of trawling the shore to see if we could find any tracks of animals or anything like that. We found raccoon tracks, we found deer tracks, stuff like that. But me, being the enterprising individual I was, wandered way off from the group. I remember I actually climbed over a fallen tree to get over to this. So I'm walking along the shore. I'm like, oh, deer tracks, whatever. Picking up cool sticks I find because I'm a kid. And then I stop. Right at the edge of the water, there's this big fucking footprint just embedded in the ground there. And I just stopped dead in my tracks. And I'm like,
God, that's chilling.
Yeah, so there is so I go over and I'm like so at this point I've read enough about this kind of stuff to know, like, okay, I don't want to walk all around it or all over it, so I'm gonna stay like a couple steps away from it, but lean over and get as much get as good of a look as I can. And I still remember this day. What's crazy about this thing is like this impression. So this is like hard Alabama clay, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Like we're talking like clay you'd find along like a riverbed. This is stuff you gotta put a lot of effort into scooping out. You can mold it into things really easy because of how solid it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is like a half a foot deep impression in this clay of this big fucking footprint. It's massive.
Ooh, the weight that would take for that individual or whatever it was to leave that footprint is immense.
Yeah, and so I want to say the time frame of this it's like late February, early March 2008. I still remember the year this happened. It was a very cold spring. Like, we were out there in, like, jackets and hats and stuff, like, wearing jeans, long socks, stuff like that. Like, this isn't the kind of weather you want to be standing barefoot on a riverbank in, is what I'm saying. Yeah, here it is. Here's his footprint.
Right.
So I
And you were
called
saying
my...
This is a giant footprint. Like, did anybody actually size it up?
Yeah, actually, because I called my friend over, who's, his dad was one of the chaperones in our group. So they were both hunters. And that's why I ran to them first, because I knew they had experience tracking things. And they could, like, compare it. Because I'd actually go like, hey, how old do you think this track is? Or how old do you think that is? So, excuse me, I'm drinking my raspberry lemonade. I'm getting a little excited here. Gotta make sure the throat's able to enunciate. And so, I pull them over, and they're both bewildered by this as much as I am, because neither of them have seen anything like that. Like, they thought I was bringing them along to see, like, a bobcat track or something. I was like, I found this big footprint, like, you know, I'm excited, 12-year-old, like, just rambling, like, 50 miles an hour, because I found this big footprint, and I'm walking over there, you know, so,
right.
They come over here, and they're both blown away, because, holy shit, here's this massive footprint. So, we get his dad's foot next to it, and it only fills like maybe half of this footprint. It's still a good size bigger. Like, his dad was a big dude. Okay, like I need to get this across. So we're standing there, we're taking pictures of it because his dad has a camera, and you know, we're talking about it, and you know, his dad finally says to me, you know, judging by how this looks, it's a couple days old. And I'm standing there, I'm doing the math. He finally put a number to it. It was about 3 days old. Well, this is the 4th day we've been at the camp. If it was 3 days old, whatever had been standing here was likely standing here when we got here 3 days prior.
Was there trying to scope it out?
Nah, this was far away from where we loaded into the camp. This was like on the tail end of the camp.
Okay.
So I was really excited because I'd found something, and that was the highlight of the day for me. Was I found a footprint that we couldn't identify.
Not the highlight of their day at all.
Now the funny part about this is, not too long after that trip ended and we went back home, that camera actually got stolen from my friend's family's car. So we were never able to get copies of that photograph, unfortunately.
Oh, that's a shame.
Ain't it a shame how things work out?
Yeah,
Right.
that's. So some would say, you know, it was oddly convenient.
That's what I hate about it, because like I still vividly remember this, but like that's always the detail that people go, "Oh, come on, that didn't happen." Like,
yeah, it's like, you know, there's that old, you know, internet saying, screenshots or it didn't happen.
yeah, Pixar didn't happen. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, Pixar didn't.
there are certain.
All I have to
reports-
say is, I swear on my life, man. I swear on my life, like Scout's honor.
Yeah.
This is 100%. I was there and it really happened. That's my story. So.
Yeah. Now I will say this. This isn't, you know, a personal story or anything. It's just something I kind of know. You know, about when Josh was saying like the whole, you know, gorillas used to be a cryptid thing. I actually know a little bit about that, and like back when they were still a cryptid, they were actually called the Pongo.
Oh.
Mhm.
And they had all sorts of supernatural abilities assigned to them. Like, well, first off, they were just, it was thought that they were just, you know, man eaters basically. They would like raid villages and drag people off to eat or rape or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But it said they also had like shape shifting abilities and everything, and it was kind of a surprise when when it came out and said, yeah, actually these things do exist. It just they
Right.
don't have any of that supernatural stuff associated with them. But the name gorilla is actually kind of a nod to that to a degree, because gorilla is derived from the Arabic word for ghoul.
Oh. Well, I learned something today.
And
Yep.
I'll keep emphasizing, Afghanistan is a hotbed.
Dude, yeah, no, there's all sorts of weird shit that comes out of there. There's like
multiple sniper stories.
I've known friends who were in service over there who came back with some weird shit that they really didn't want to talk about. Like, and it wasn't even like, oh, my truck got ambushed or anything like that. Nah. Like, they tell me it was some spooky shit, and then they leave it at that, and they would never tell me. So, and that always drove me crazy. Like, I get it, because it's associated with a lot of bad things that happened over there, but like at the same time, like, dude, what the fuck was it that made you go that's spooky when you're like a dude who's been through like military training and stuff? So.
I'll briefly mention a story about a Army Ranger recon sniper who was in a long-term firefight with 4 other snipers across ridge lines in the Kabul region, I believe.
Yeah.
And he had taken out 3 of the 4 snipers at this point. It was consistently moving about the ridge line and moving down farther into the farther gullies. And he had stopped doing that on like the 4th or 5th night because he had noticed in his scope large, hairy individuals that were probably, he said, anywhere from 8 to 9 feet tall, were picking up the bodies of the snipers and dragging them back into the gully he was going towards. So he had started moving back the other way and gotten out of there. But there were also a story of a special operations unit, I believe, or a Marine Force recon unit. I'm not entirely sure about that, but they had been extracting through a valley, and they had been fighting terrorists at the time, I believe Al-Qaeda, and suddenly whatever they were on the opposite side of started hooping and hollering and throwing rocks at them, and it sounded completely inhuman. And they were basically fighting terrorists on the right and fighting 8 men on the left, all the way down to the exfil site. And like only one person kind of came out about it, and then someone else in the squad corroborated it. And I believe it was a interview on Sasquatch Chronicles. Like I listen to them a lot because of how many interviews they get from higher profile people.
Yeah, I was just listening to one from a helicopter pilot the other day.
Oh man. Like they got some crazy encounters in there.
Yeah.
And they generally don't bring people on unless they have some sort of verifiable evidence. Which I think's a very good trait for a show like that. But I guess we can get into, me and Kaz can pitch a story that we think's a really monumental part of the Bigfoot phenomenon, and we'll have Kaiden kind of.
Well, I don't know if I think it's monumental, but it's definitely worth discussing. There are other ones that I think are more important, or like Ape Canyon, for instance. Even though Ape Canyon is kind of also steeped in the side of this, culture that we're both very like toward.
Yeah, because the man who recorded it was a very weird individual.
Yes, he was.
But go ahead. I'm sorry.
There's the famous ones like the tidbit by Teddy Roosevelt that he told of this other hunter. There's the story of that guy that got kidnapped by a Bigfoot, and he said he stayed with them for a little bit. I forget the name of the guy, but like he gave them like tobacco and stuff. And I'm to this day I'm still of the belief that he was at least sexually attracted to one of them.
That is
it's like,
wild.
why did he stay with them that long? That's like,
unless you were that scared of your life that you weren't willing to run and agitate them.
Like they weren't hostile to him generally, so he could have just gotten up and left at any time. So why'd he stay?
Right.
Was he looking at Sasquatch titties? That's what I think. So
I've heard one story about.
I want to say his name was like
that.
His name was like Alfred or Grover or something like that. Bigfoot and Grover kidnap. Yeah, I think it was Grover Krantz. I want to say.
Yeah, Grover Krantz. I've heard about that. I've heard that name before.
Yeah.
Now, like, I don't know exactly how verifiable all of that can be, but there was a Rocky Mountain hunter.
No, my bad. Not Grover Krantz. Albert Osman.
Okay.
That's
yeah.
Fair.
it's good because we didn't want to misname somebody with a story
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, this is a pretty old account too, from like the early 20th century. So
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. But, was that the story that you wanted to get into?
I mean, I could if you wanted me to, but
Well, whichever one you feel like makes a difference.
Albert
Like,
Ostman, that was one I read about in a lot of books growing up, so that one kind of sticks out a little bit more in my head. So I'm going to be reading off of a website where this has been re-recorded. So this is so Albert Ostman was a Canadian prospector and lumberjack. In 1924, he went on vacation to the rugged wilderness near Toba Inlet, British Columbia, Canada. One of his purposes at the time was to try and find what he claimed to be a long-lost gold mine that he was convinced existed out there in the dense forest, which is already odd and intriguing enough as it is, but would be overshadowed by the bizarreness of what would purportedly happen to him during his trip. While on his journey into these remote badlands, Ostman's Indian guide told him that the man who had allegedly originally found the lost gold mine was rumored to have been killed by a Sasquatch, which was, according to Ostman, the first time he had ever heard of such creatures, despite having long been a hardened outdoorsman. The Indian, again, I apologize for the politically incorrect phrasing here, but I'm reading it directly from the text.
fair enough.
Explained about the large, hairy man-like beast they called the Sasquatch, and told the large footprints they left behind. But Ostman at the time did not believe a word of it, instead chalking it up to a crazy old native legends. Not long after this, the two made camp, and Ostman headed out on his own with some supplies in a pack, and armed with his rifle and a knife to investigate a pass through the mountains that he'd seen, as well as to do some prospecting. After a few days of camping alone in the wilderness, some rather odd things were noticed by him. One morning, he found that some of the items in his camp had been moved around, although nothing had been taken. And he slept that night with his rifle within easy reach, thinking that perhaps a porcupine or another animal would come and pick through his camp. The following morning, he found his backpack had been emptied out but was still oddly hanging from where he had left it, and that this time some things were missing, such as a half-pound pack of prunes and all of his pancake flour. The only thing that hadn't been touched was his bag of salt. An examination of the camp turned up no footprints, and the intrusion did not seem to be the work of animals, so nothing had been torn apart or haphazardly ransacked or strewn about. For 3 nights in a row, the mysterious intruder visited the camp unseen, and all efforts by Ostman to stake out the camp to find the trespasser and the act were to no avail. On the 4th night of these strange incidents, he went to bed fully clothed with both his knife and rifle within easy reach. This time he intended to stay awake all night in order to catch the trespasser, but he eventually fell into a deep sleep. At some point, he claims he was awakened by something picking him up, sleeping bag and all, and he groggily thought it might be a snowslide, although there was no snow in the area at the time. He said that he then felt as if he had been put up on horseback and that whoever was carrying him was walking. He couldn't see anything as he was wrapped up in his sleeping bag, and he desperately grabbed for his rifle as he tried to figure out who or what was carrying him along. Unable to move, and with various equipment sticking into him uncomfortably, he could only wait there in the encroaching dark and see what was being taken. Whatever had captured him seemed to be taking him uphill as he could feel each step lifting upwards, began to notice that the thing was breathing heavily, as well as occasionally letting out coughing noises and strange shattering sounds. For 3 hours he was carried like this through the wilderness when suddenly his sleeping bag was dumped on the ground and he warily peeked outside. It was too dark at the time for him to clearly see what was out there. He could vaguely make out large dark shapes and hear what sounded like several large creatures chattering unintelligibly amongst each other. It seemed to be a family of the very hairy humanoids his old Indian guide had told him about. Ostman called out to ask what the creatures wanted and was answered with more of the chattering sounds. He thought of escape, but his legs were too badly cramped and painful for him to even walk, let alone run away. As it got lighter outside, he claims that he could finally make out 4 humanoid creatures, unclothed and fully covered in shaggy hair. According to him, there were 2 big ones, which seemed to be the father, there were 2 big ones which seemed to be the father, alright, interesting, which was a massive specimen about 8 feet tall, and the mother, as well as 2 smaller ones which looked to be children, a boy and a girl, with smaller, meaning that they were only around 6 to 7 feet tall. Ostman would later say of their appearance, the young fellow might have been between 11 to 18 years old, and about 7 feet tall, and might weigh about 300 pounds. His chest would be 50 to 55 inches, his waist about 36 to 38 inches. Excuse me while I take a drink here. He had wide jaws, narrow forehead that slanted upward, round at the back about 4 or 5 inches higher than the forehead. The hair on their heads was about 6 inches long. The hair on the rest of their body was short and thick in places. This is a pretty lengthy description. I'm just going to skim through it.
Yeah, but they're describing essentially the canonical.
Yeah,
head,
the
conical head.
the conical head, the messy hair on the head. Average, weight and height, noting the female had wide hips and a goose-like walk, which is why I think Homeboy was lusting after one of them. He was like, you took notice of those hips, huh?
Yeah.
She was not. I'm gonna read this part. She was not built for beauty or speed. Some of those lovable brassieres and uplifts would have been great improvement on her looks and her figure. Bro, I'm telling you, I think he wanted to fuck it. The
It's like,
man's
why?
the man's eye teeth were longer than the rest of the teeth, but not long enough to be called tusks. He must have been near 8 feet tall, with a big barrel chest and big hump on his back, powerful shoulders, his biceps on upper arm were enormous and tapered down to his elbows. Forearms were longer than common people have, but well proportioned. Hands were wide, palm long and broad, hollow like a scoop. Fingers were short in proportion to the rest of the hand. Fingernails were like chisels. The only place they had no hair was inside their hands and sole of their feet, and upper part of nose and eyelids. Never to see their ears, they were covered with hair hanging over them. Anyways, the creature did not seem threatening or aggressive towards him at all, and even the young ones seemed a little frightened of him, but neither did they seem ready to let him leave. According to Osmond, for the next 6 days, the family of Sasquatch forcefully kept him there, with a large male constantly nearby and saying it's the only obvious escape route. During this time, Osmond claimed the family creature slept within a shelter lined and covered with bark and dry moss. Then gradually, the curious creature would come closer to observe him, including the younger ones. The family also offered him food in the form of nuts and a type of sweet grass, which the young boy Sasquatch would definitely climb up the mountain to get. In return, he would let it play with a snuff box, which it would practice opening and closing as well as tasting the snuff inside. When the young male seemed to demand one for his sister, he gave her one as well. For the most part, the adults were described as mostly resting all day while the children climbed and played. He claimed on several occasions he picked up his rifle and tried to walk out of there, but the large male stood in front of him, holding his hand out and vocalizing irritably. Although he had his rifle, he chose not to fire upon them as they seemed remarkably human, showed no inclination towards harming him, and he was not sure if his rifle would even hurt the massive beast, instead serving only to anchor it. Considering the younger one seemed to like playing with snuff boxes so much and looking at the remaining snuff within, and the father had also shown interest in them, he began to concoct a plan to incapacitate or even kill the large adult male by feeding him a full box of snuff, after which he felt confident that he would be able to escape with little resistance. One day, Osman opened a new box of snuff and took a dose, and at the same time, the adult male reportedly suddenly snatched it away and emptied the entire contents of his mouth, even going so far as to thoroughly lick out any remnants. As predicted, he fell violently ill, and Osman made a run for it, reportedly firing his rifle over the mother's head as she pursued him and scaring her off. After some time of slogging through the wilderness, ever wary of being followed, Osman was finally rescued by some loggers and brought back to civilization. He would keep his story quiet for decades, afraid of ridicule until increasing reports of Bigfoot sightings in the 50s persuaded him to finally come forth with his tale in 57. Albert Osman's amazing story has been picked apart and debated ever since, with some calling him a liar and others pointing to it as genuine evidence of Bigfoot, as well as everything in between, but we may never know the truth. Whether his account is true or the product of an active imagination is certainly one of the stranger and more detailed reports of kidnappings.
Definitely not the only one, though, because mine's pretty up there with it. But first, Kaiden, what do you got? What kind of thoughts you have on that kind of an encounter?
Well, the main thing that I thought that sprung to my mind was like a kind of a more humorous thing, where Kaz was, talking about how the guy seemed to notice a lot about the female uh, one. It was like at one point back in the day, I remember hearing something like the first question that a lot of people ask whenever we find like a new creature, can we fuck it?
I mean, yeah, unfortunately so.
Especially when it comes to aliens. It's like that's the first question on a lot of people's minds is, can we have sex with this thing?
Do the alien girls have titties? Is like one of my favorite finds ever.
Lord Almighty.
So,
I mean, fair enough question, I think.
yeah, it's like, yeah, I mean, that's what it really strongest in my mind. But again, yeah, again, too, it's like this with this particular thing. It's like I don't know. I would tend to not believe in it.
Yeah, I don't really put a lot of stock in Osman's story either, just because it's too detailed.
Yeah, it's way too detailed, especially for something that was kept like for over decades.
At least
It's like,
three,
yeah, sure, I know.
at the minimum. So,
Yeah, it's like I know that some people like will can and they'll say they internalize stuff and remember it vividly as if it happened, just like thing. But it's like from what I know, especially too with in law and all that stuff, eyewitness testimony is
un-
sometimes incredibly unreliable.
unreliable as hell. One of my favorite testaments to that is there was this experiment they did in Central
Hmm.
Park where they got like 40 people in a circle, and they basically enacted a purse snatching incident. They got some actors and they had them walking. This dude walked up, snatched the purse, and ran off. And then they each asked each of those 40 people, and there was not a single thing they could agree on.
Right. So yeah. So I mean, stuff like that, especially like I said, if he sat on it for at least 30 years, you know, uh, it was way too detailed. I think, for me to be able to believe that. Then also too, just like these creatures just captured him and did nothing with him except feed him.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like a the behavior of like even a great ape.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah, definitely. Like,
it's like
Also, the fact that they were like, "Oh, we like your tobacco."
I can eerily see that, like, a great ape of similar intelligence, like monkeys, alright, lemurs, and other, like, baboons and other African primates will actually purposefully sting themselves with scorpions to get themselves high and will pass it around to each other.
yeah, that I'm not, the whole like tobacco thing. I'm not too, concerned about. It's the fact that they took like a guy, someone from another species, a species different from them, just took him, set him in their home amongst their young,
And just kept him there.
and kept him there.
Yeah.
That doesn't
It's
seem like a survival tactic at all.
No, that seems the opposite of a survival tactic. That sounds like a really stupid thing to do, like a thing that a creature that would when extinct would have done.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like you're taking an unknown thing to your young. It's like creatures in the wild are usually kind of protective of their young and don't let other things around their young. It's like, I mean, it's even too. It's like with some pet birds, it's like when they mate and get like nest and hatch babies and all stuff, they get very territorial about that crap.
Mm-hmm.
Like even to the point that like they can this like macaws can sometimes attack their owners.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So and it's like owners that have had them for years, all of a sudden they nest and all this and they get like that territorial. So it's like, I mean of course like, a macaw is not a great ape, obviously, but I mean it doesn't go it doesn't fit with like how a wild animal would seem to react. Is like, hey, there's this creature we don't know walking around our territory. Fuck it, let's take it to the kids.
Exactly.
I mean, that's not what a wild animal does. I'm sorry.
And what gets me about the whole thing is that there's plenty of missing persons cases, like missing 411 and things like that in parks around the United States, and David Paulides does a lot of good work about that. But generally, he wouldn't have made it. I mean, he'd have made it to the nest, but I mean, he wouldn't be around to tell himself about it. That's for sure. Like, he'd have been food in an instant. Let's be honest.
Well, if not food, he probably would have beaten to death. It would have been food for something else. But I mean, like if we take it at the value that these things were like, vegetarians, eating nuts and moss and all that other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So like, they still probably would have reacted towards him like, a gorilla would.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and if it was a herbivore, why was it out obviously hunting around?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is such a thing called gathering.
I get that, but like it sounded more omnivorous up until that point.
Yeah, no,
You know what I mean?
I personally also believe Squatch is omnivorous just because I find it hard to swallow that creatures of that size can sustain themselves on nuts and berries.
No way.
Well, gorillas are vegetarians, so.
True, but they have a ton of forest vegetation in their areas, and a lot of Sasquatch areas
True.
are mostly animal based as far as calorie intake goes.
Yep.
So there's also, I've seen a video that looked pretty legit of a turkey hunter. She was just sitting there next to a tree, and you could just see she's visibly, like, distraught. And she turns her camera screen around, and there's two of them, and they're carrying deer like we would carry jackets over our forearm, like we're going to a fancy dinner.
Yeah, no, I think I've seen the turkey hunter video.
And that one is nuts. And I get it, because I've heard plenty of different accounts of these things using chase tactics to barrel up herds of deer into ambush areas for other parts of the troop. And it's wild kind of things, but it's stuff that would definitely line up, because chimpanzees do similar behavior for certain animals and do it to each other. Like, they're very much ambush predators. And a community-based animal that's biggest survival trait is its intelligence generally tends to enact ambush tactics. So it makes sense logically if you think about it from the scope of it being a relic hominid or a great ape. Like, it's how we hunted back when we were cavemen. And if people believe in Neanderthal theory or devolution or evolution of the Neanderthal being Sasquatch, that kind of makes sense too. I don't think it personally is. I think, if anything, it would look a whole lot different than what it is now. Like, Dryopithecine makes more sense as a descendant, but that's a whole other conversation alone.
It was also, too, wasn't Neanderthal, like, out in Europe?
It was a lot of places, but Neanderthal predation theory is interesting, because it kind of explains our sixth sense per se. You know, that feeling that you're being watched, or that feeling in the back of your head. Because Neanderthal and humans fought and interacted and hunted each other, and plenty of things happened for, I think, 10,000 years or something like that. And Neanderthals were winning for a long time, until man started getting a lot better about sharpening tools and learning how to hunt against them, because Neanderthals were primarily nocturnal and man was primarily diurnal. So they learned how to survive at night, and that generally pushed it back.
Well, that's cute picture of Samus, but here you can have that. Yeah, no, I went and found the clip you were talking about.
It's a wild one.
It's been a while since I've sat down and watched one, and I'm kind of why is it? God damn it! Opera does this to me. Where, like, I'll copy a link, and then it'll be like, "No, you didn't. Here's the last link you copied," and I'm like, "There we go." Sheesh. Okay. Anyways,
so we can get into my next, my story next. So,
but I like that we had a good conversation off of that one.
Definitely.
TLDR. We're all in agreement. It's a bunch of bupkis.
Definitely. Not the debunked.
Yeah. Myth busted.
All right, so I got one for y'all. Missing 411 really covered it, and it's one of the bigger discussion topics around Bigfoot and its potential predatory nature, is the disappearance of Dennis Martin. All right.
I will say, going into this, I find missing 411 shit to be upsetting. There were a couple of episodes of Dogman Encounter Radio where this guy had gone through missing 411 and found accounts of unusually large dogs attacking and mauling, like, people. And in a lot of cases, they were children. And I had to stop listening to that shit, because it was actually, like, legitimately upsetting me while I was at work. I had to turn those episodes off. I've actually deleted them from my library, because, like, it's not fun to listen to. Now, the good news is, more often than not in these cases, posses were formed and these things were hunted down and shot. But, like, it's still, like, children died. Like, children actually died.
And unfortunately, we believe the same thing happened to young Dennis.
So let's get into it.
We get to I'll set the scene as 1962. All right. He is an American child that we believe had nonverbal autism. And back in the day, that was definitely not well documented in the psychological
Or understood.
community.
Yep.
So the parents kind of understood he was nonverbal, but he had like three older siblings that they all played with and mostly kept an eye on him pretty good. And so they were up in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee, and he was 6 years old. All right. And they had set up him, his grandfather, his older, and the older brother of the father had set up on Father's Day weekend 1969. And the camping trip was something they did pretty regularly, where they hiked from Katie's Cove to Russell Field to camp overnight. Then they would go to Spence Field near the Appalachian Trail, where they would camp until they went back home.
Yep.
Now, he disappeared at around 4:30 in the afternoon while playing hide and seek, basically, with his other children in the family. And essentially what happened, while the father was tending to some things around the camp, he looked up and he saw this kid, and he looked down for like 10 seconds or so, and he looked up and kid was gone.
Yep.
And
That fast.
it was that quick. And he was thinking, oh, he was hiding and they were playing hide and seek anyway, whatever. So 5 minutes goes by, all the other children return to the campsite, and the father was like, hey, where's Dennis? And the kids were like, oh, I thought he was hiding. And so they all go out to try and find him. And after not finding him out in the woodland for about a couple of hours, they had reportedly went straight to National Park Rangers, where incoming the largest manhunt in a national park in United States history gets kicked off. We're talking thousands of volunteers, a full company of National Guard and United States Army Rangers come in to comb the national park for this kid. They're bringing in dog teams, they're bringing in everything, helicopters, all kinds of stuff. They've got the fire department organizing civilian search teams. They've got the military working through its own networks and stuff, and they're all communicating together. They found nothing. Not a trace of this kid. And they had searched a huge amount of territory several different times. Everywhere the places a kid of that age would be able to get to within the time frame he was gone, plus a couple of extra miles, just for good measure. Nothing was found of the kid. Now, a lot of people think that he'd either perished due to exposure, likely during the first night because it was late in the year when it happened, and generally in September in the Smoky Mountains, it's not that nice out there for kids that are running around in basically a t-shirt and shorts. Now, the second theory that people will subscribe to is that it was a animal predation incident. Now, there's things that can't be explained through that, like because in animal predation, you likely 90% of the time come across a pretty grisly scene somewhere. And there are tracks to prove it. It's pretty easy to track an animal predation thing, and that comes from a lot of animal trackers, a lot of law enforcement. It's pretty well documented.
There would have been remains
somewhere. Now, there's one part of the story I'll get to a little bit later, and during the search effort, they had literally came across nothing, but apparently the Boy Scouts that were camping across the lake from where they were at were helping out with the search, and they had heard, or they'd seen child-sized footprints next to a stream where they had just disappeared. But the tracks indicated that one foot was barefoot. Alright? Now, here's the problem, is like, how in the hell does this kid get all the way across the lake, walking either direction, with one, like, and he's obviously distraught at this point and lost. Like, he's wandering way out of the way from where he had started. He's way lost at this point. Now, they still can't connect this directly with Dennis Martin. This is just something they believe could be related. Now, they found a shoe and a sock later that they do believe belonged to Dennis. So, like, that's the only thing that can connect that stream of events to it. And, like, given they found the sock and the shoe, I guess, yeah, that was probably him. But the third different thing that kind of throws a wrench in a lot of these arguments is the third theory. All right? The third theory, and it's the theory that his father is a proponent of, is that someone or something took him. Now, the afternoon that Martin disappeared, another tourist in his family, Harold Key, heard an enormous, sickening scream while they were out, and they were out looking at birds, basically 7 or 8 miles away, about an hour away, or about an hour after the disappearance of Dennis Martin.
Is this still on the same, like, national park land, mind?
It's within the same park. It's, like, within, not just the same national park, it's within the same area of Spence Field. Mm-hmm. It's, like, they're closer to the, I would say, let me see if I can see exactly where it was. No, they're not listening here. But whenever they heard the scream, the kids look over and they say, "Hey, Dad, that's a bear." And the dad looks over, whatever it was stood up on 2 legs. This big, shaggy thing. And whenever it apparently noticed that it had been noticed and runs off. Now, it was carrying something that he described was akin to like a sack of potatoes slung over his back, limp, running off. But it was about the size of a sack of potatoes. That's about the size of a small child. Now, whenever this happened and Key reported this, the FBI got brought in. And they could not link any evidence regarding a disappearance on federal territory with the disappearance of Dennis Martin. Now, there was another person that was on the trail that was acting really shady that day. And he apparently got into a white car and abruptly sped the fuck off. Now, 2 things. That guy could have been up to something shady, but if I saw a Bigfoot, I'd probably be running pretty quick too. Mm-hmm. So, like, there's 2 sides of that story. Now,
some other details about the case that are worth mentioning is that during the search efforts that happened, curiously, all the parties involved seemed to be competing with each other. They were not sharing information between each other. They were openly hostile. Like, all of them either dismissed or were openly hostile to, what's the name of the father?
His name is... Its last name's Martin. I'm looking around here.
All of them were either openly dismissive or flat out hostile to Mr. Martin. No one ever gave him updates on anything. And the thing is, like, these were wildly different, like, equipped groups. Obviously, you had the park rangers, but then you had the National Guard, who, these guys didn't roll up with, like, search and rescue equipment. They rolled up with, like, full kit, is the thing. And that's what makes it all the more peculiar, because usually during a missing persons investigation, if they do bring in that kind of, reinforcements or whatever you want to call it, they don't roll up like they're about to go shoot something.
Right. And, like, it's just really crazy because whenever a lot of people talk about the Men in Black or the Army showing up to one of these encounters or something, it sounds like definitely there's some competition involved. So, like, who knows what's going on with that? I don't really get into a whole lot of those kind of stories because then you start going into a bigger rabbit hole. Mm-hmm. Now, the crazier part was they really came up with nothing, but Harold Key's testimony was actually kept from Mr. Martin for a while. Mm-hmm. that he was in here trying to figure out what happened to his son, and he was asking about updates and everything, and they were keeping him up to date enough, but they never gave away the Harold Key incident until it was almost too late for him to do anything about it. And that was probably one of the better leads they had about what happened to his son. Now, the only other thing was that years later, after the statute of limitations had ran out on the case, even though technically there is no statute of limitations for kidnapping, especially in Tennessee, so the guy was a little off it, but he did it for another reason. He was an illegal ginseng hunter. So the statute of limitations had run out for that. Okay? So he had came up and he said while he was out, illegally out there hunting ginseng near Big Hollow in Tremont, he had come across the scattered remains of a small child.
Oh, no.
The thing is, he kept it to himself until statute of limitation ran out because of the fear of prosecution for having ginseng. So
and also the fact that they, like, it's very likely they would have pointed the finger at him had he said, hey, I found these remains. Because because more often than not, one thing that keeps people from reporting murders is usually the people who find the murders are oftentimes the first suspects in a case. And it's an unfortunate fact of life. And it when there's missing children involved, then it gets even worse. So
exactly. And the problem with that too is that at the time there was so much time that it came by, like 15 or 20 years, that decomposition would definitely have occurred. So a subsequent search led to nothing.
Yep.
Now, a lot of people talk about, like, oh, if Sasquatch had passed, where bones would go, you know? In those areas in Appalachia, like, decomposition happens rapidly quick. And with animals and different bugs and things like that, like, you can get rendered down to nothing in a matter of months.
Yeah, I remember when I took my forensics class in high school, we studied about how bodies decompose, and it happens in multiple phases, and one of the first things that happens after about a week or so is when the insects move in. Not even a week or so, I think it was within, like, about a day. And it's, like, one of the key things that that they use to figure out how old a body is, like, you know, what kind of insects are there, and stuff like that. Well, here's the thing: in Appalachia, you turn over a rock, you're gonna find plenty of bugs. You got a corpse right there. Well, free food right for the picking. So of course they're gonna swarm it. So.
Happens quick. But go ahead, Kaiden. See what do you think about that one?
There is one thing I found in, you know, the short amount of time I've been able to, you know, look up this particular story. The key testimony. That I think might have. I'm not sure about that because it's like the stuff that I found. It actually was that the thing that they saw, you know, that you said is like, look, it's a bear. Then it stood up and walked out two legs and, you know, walked off or something. Was the guy that got in a white car and drove off.
Okay.
So it looks like that somehow maybe his testimony got broken up and by somebody with fantastical ideas, maybe.
Perhaps.
Or
unfortunately,
not, but it's
when it comes to stories this old, you know, people will always take them and kind of put them to their own angle.
Right. Well, what's been, like, recorded in, you know, the books and everything there's a book that I found that was where it's quoted from. That's like a Death in the Great Smoky Mountains, Stories of Accidents and Foolhardiness in the Most Popular Park. It actually talks about the Dennis Martin disappearance, and that's where it says the key. You know, the key said they saw this unkempt guy going through the woods and then getting into a white car and speeding off, like, really quickly after hearing the scream. So you know, so it's like I'm not sure if they actually saw a Bigfoot, or if it just that their testimony was later twisted by some,
Word
like,
of
maybe
mouth.
overzealous Bigfoot hunters
Yeah.
into something that maybe wasn't, because it is in in a Bigfoot hotspot area, I suppose.
Mhm.
So
Like,
The
maybe
even
someone's.
even with that complication, it's still an upsetting story about a kid going disappearing almost
Oh,
like
definitely.
instantly under the weirdest of circumstances with like a bizarre aftermath and just all like it's there's
there
a
was so
reason
much
it's
that went wrong.
there's a reason it's still talked about to this day in the
Hmm.
community because like it could be any number of things. It really could be. Um,
It really could, and yeah, it's like whenever it's a kid getting killed or dying or whatnot, it's always an upsetting story to be sure. But it's like, I mean, with disappearances and all that stuff, yeah, it can happen that fast sometimes.
yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, it just, a momentary lapse of judgment, or maybe even still, it may have been more than a moment. It's like, and maybe that they were looking away for longer than they thought,
yeah,
mm-hmm.
and then when they turned back around, all of a sudden he's gone, and it's like I only took my eyes off him for a second, when it was really like, well, you were filling with a fire for 15 minutes actually, so
yep.
you know,
It is true.
So,
As a parent, you're not invincible. Every
no,
parent really knows that. After like, as soon as they get up to start walking, like you gotta keep an eye on them, but that gets rough. Especially you got 4 kids you're looking at.
and especially if one of them doesn't talk.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's a extra part on this, like me being an amateur Bigfoot sleuth. I got into a conversation with a YouTube channel in that area that is a part of the town that this disappearance occurred in or near. And the name of the channel is South Force 10. Now, this guy has a video on the Dennis Martin disappearance on how the locals feel about it and their accounts of the story, because the other part of it is like the locals have a pretty similarly corroborated version of events that differs from the news outlet version of events.
mhm.
Now, apparently, according to everybody there, it was like the execution of this rescue attempt was so bad that it honestly changed the way that law enforcement enacts search and rescue to this day. It was one of the biggest manhunts in history. They couldn't find nothing.
Mhm.
So, like, everything was inorganized, all of that kind of stuff. So they decided to change up how they did that a lot from now on. Now, the locals, knowing a lot more about what happens around there, the stories that don't necessarily make the news that happen down there, they all believe the same thing. That the quote-unquote the wild man got him. And whenever you talk about the wild man in Tennessee, it's not exactly the creature you would come to think of as Bigfoot. Okay? The one of the big thicket research groups like got into a huge document about how there are different types of Bigfoots depending on the sighting and everything, that they share the same qualities but they don't exactly have the same look to them. And the closest thing that they have to a wild man would be a type 3 Bigfoot, where it's definitely a Bigfoot in size and stature, but it's not hairy and overgrown like Patty. It's more shaggy and its hair's kind of long and drapey, but it isn't thick. Now, it looks more human because of that. It has more human facial features, but it's definitely not a human.
Mhm.
And whatever it was, they generally believe that these things are like 6 to 7 feet tall, generally. Because when I heard this video, I was like, well, why not? I typed it out to him, DM'd him. I was like, well, I'm an amateur Bigfoot sleuth in my part-time. I do some research into this kind of thing, and I listen to a lot of things about doctors, all that stuff, and I've been compiling a kind of profile for the local area of Bigfoot. Like, what's kind of weird is that a lot of Bigfoot stories where I am are a lot more aggressive in nature and happen a lot more around caves. That's something the Appalachian Bigfoot loves, apparently, according to plenty of eyewitness testimony. Some of them are a little more theatrical, I'll be honest, but there's some weird ones out there. Now, when I asked them to clarify about it, they're saying a lot of the news reports, when they asked locals and they said wild man, they didn't get them right. They were saying they ran with it as, oh, these are vagrant humans. Now, what's interesting is that the investigation regarding vagrant humans as suspects in the disappearance was thoroughly researched by the FBI, and none of these individuals were considered suspect in any way. And it got to the point where the news even went out there and tried to get a interview with one of these guys, one of the more famous ones in the local community. They found him, and yeah, this guy's completely harmless. He just doesn't like paying taxes.
Yeah. No wonder the cops were after him.
Right, like, and the rangers keep an eye on these people, but they don't generally deal with them because they're not doing anything. Basically, they're just living off the land. They might like wander around in the trash somewhere or something every now and then, or like wander into town to trade for something.
Yep.
But like, that's about it. Now, when they said wild man, they meant something more akin to a type 3 Bigfoot. That these things are smaller in stature but look non-human, and they got long hair, they're shaggy, kind of weirdly draping hair, and they're kind of aggressive. If you come up across one, it's usually a few of them, and they're not happy to see you.
But if my question though is, if there was such a thing in that area, why are the vagrants not disappearing if they're hostile?
See, I would imagine they probably are, because the problem of it is that vagrant human, like homeless people and all of that, they go disappearing by the thousands every year.
They do.
But you said that
And a lot of them go unrecorded.
Yep.
you said that the rangers are keeping an eye on these people.
No, not to
If they
say
start-
that, all these disappearances are Sasquatch, there's a massive conspiracy, but it's like, there's any number of reasons. Death of exposure, people,
Yeah, but it's
like...
yeah, but it's like I would imagine though, like if there's these people all over the place and the rangers are keeping an eye on them, but just not dealing with them.
Yeah.
The rangers would notice if like
One
all of a
them
sudden
left.
all their vagrants start disappearing.
Yeah.
True. Now, there are plenty of disappearances in the Smoky Mountains that happened over the years, especially along the Appalachian Trail. I don't know why. It's just like, other than familiarity with the surroundings and maybe being cunning enough to stay away from where they're at, or knowing when they're in the area to retreat. Like, humans are adaptive too. Like, yeah, you can fall prey to these things, no doubt, if they're in the area. But if you're living in the woods your whole time, and you get attuned to the thing, you become a part of it. And not to say they wouldn't get taken out by one of these people, but I would give a wild vagrant who's been living in the woods for 15 to 20 years and been doing fine, I'd give him a better chance of getting away from one of these things than a tourist just kind of hiking around.
Right. It just it's weird to me that like these creatures if they're as aggressive as they say as you say they are, why like it doesn't make sense to me that they wouldn't attack like the vagrants as well as the tourists.
Vagrants will be an easier food source too.
Yeah.
So
And, outside of maybe rummaging through local trash.
Right. It just seems like for this it seems that like a tourist disappearance is easier, I guess you say, to happen because they're not familiar with the area. They can get lost, or it just like. But if there was something aggressive like hunting people, it's like it doesn't make sense that they would only target certain people.
Yeah.
And not others. It's especially too. It's like with these vagrants, it's like they're most often. Like I would imagine the vagrants are most often living alone. They'd be the perfect target to ambush.
Well, so would a nonverbal kid that, like a small
Right,
child, too.
right, but it's only the child that disappeared. It's not the other individuals,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's it seems in this case it's more plausible that the child, being unfamiliar with his surroundings, got lost, got hurt. If he was by a river, got swept downstream and never to be seen again.
Which kind of is supported by the Boy Scouts and what they
Hmm.
had found.
Yes. So rather than, there being a Type 3 creature hunting humans in the woods, because it's like I would expect, especially too. It's like there's no remains found. There's no, and if they were diligent in their searches on stuff, and this kid was like messily eaten by a creature out there, something would have been found. I would think. But then again, I don't know. But to me, it sounds more plausible that the kid just, you know, like I said, he just got lost on his own and got injured and was unrecoverable,
Mm-hmm.
rather than this was an attack by a cryptid.
Mm-hmm. See,
Um,
Now,
that's why we had you in here, Caden, so we get this kind of discussion.
exactly,
Yeah,
because it is important because
I
it
see.
hasn't been linked to Bigfoot specifically, but
mhm,
the discussion around it has really opened up a lot of avenues of people to communicate about more aggressive
mhm.
encounters they've had.
Yeah,
And it,
especially too since it's like when I look into it and everything, of the three big rumors and all that stuff, like theories as to what happened to him, Bigfoot doesn't even enter the picture.
Yeah, yeah, no.
Like even in
That's.
theory three,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like someone or something took him,
Mm-hmm.
it's like it's all talk about him being kidnapped by some guy,
Yeah.
mm-hmm,
and that's where they have the oh, this guy was seen running from the area really quickly and jumping in a white car and driving off.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
true.
so yeah, I just, like I said, it's like there was one old saying that I remember. I can't remember where it came from, but it's like extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Very true.
And right now there is no
Mm-hmm.
evidence that a Bigfoot snatched this kid.
We have pieces of evidence, but not evidence
It's
itself. Basically.
it's basically like I mean I would almost hesitate to say circumstantial evidence, really,
Yeah. No, totally. I'm right there
Definitely.
with you. Like.
because
Now,
it's like even like the closest thing that there is to like a Bigfoot sighting in the area could very well just been like a misrepresentation of someone's testimony.
Mm-hmm.
mm-hmm,
Yeah. No. Like as
So
sensationalist and as it is to say, oh, Bigfoot snatched this kid and ate him up. It's not. It's not really a likely outcome.
it's as
Like.
again,
Mm,
another saying I heard. It's like reality is often way more boring than we want it to
it
be.
is. It
uh-huh.
is. Like, for
That
instance, that incident that happened at the start of recording where I was like, oh, I saw a light. Here's the thing. I have a lamp right off to the right of my desk that's more or less
hmm
around the same color of that light I saw. And I'm pretty
hmm
sure it was just like one of the floaters in my eyes caught the light weird or something. I don't know. It was my eye
hmm
acting up. Like I'm going nearsighted. It could have been any number of things. Um, would it be fun if it was something weird and paranormal? Yeah, absolutely. But chances are,
yeah,
like, I probably just saw my lamp out of the corner of my eye and freaked out. So,
yeah, and that's something too. It's like as Josh said, when you guys were growing up, you were watching these Monster Hunter series and all that stuff.
mhm.
Well, a big show that I used to watch all the time was Ghost Hunters.
Yeah, I was a
Mm-hmm.
ghost hunter watcher too.
But the thing is, it's like as I watch all that stuff,
They would.
I then come across videos where it showed how they faked everything,
Yep. Yeah.
Right.
GHI
and it
got in a lot of
and
hot water about that.
that immediately, like it breaks everything for it.
Yep.
It's like
Yeah. No. It's funny because, like,
And so,
over the years, like, when I was a kid, there was the big paranormal theory. There was ghosts, aliens, and cryptids, right? Well, here's the thing. Nowadays, it's like, yep, cryptids. Aliens, I'm like, I believe in them statistically. And ghosts, I'm like, you better have some really fucking good evidence to show me. Because I'm at the point where I'm like, they ain't real, bro. You know?
It's like aliens existing, sure. Advanced life that can travel the stars. Now you're starting to get into the realm of bullshit.
Yeah, why would they control our relatively, like, middle of fucking nowhere in terms of galactic, presence or whatever place to go kidnap a bunch of hick farmers and say, "Ooh, spooky shit," and then just drop them off? Like, come on, man.
Because it's...
Now, even a lot of scientists that are on the very cusps of quantum mechanics and start to understand how the universe is working on a submolecular level, they believe that if there are aliens, it's more transdimensional than it is interstellar, just because of how much we don't understand faster than light. Like, we just, a couple of months ago, I think, or maybe a year ago, we were able to make a bubble in gravity that would essentially be the premise of faster than light travel as we know it, is how you basically enter in as part of light when you go faster than light, and you end up curbing in between molecules, and then you start moving faster and time starts to shift.
Yeah,
now,
but that's
a microscopic pinprick sized bubble. That's not the size of no spaceship, so we don't even know how to make it that big, let alone use it or get into it in order to jump into different planets and stuff. Like, it's to a lot of people, it's easier to make a trans-dimensional portal, and that's kind of crazy.
And not only that, it's like the amount of power and all stuff that would probably be involved in for creating such a thing that someone could use, themselves would probably be astronomical.
Right.
To the point of just infeasible. But
think about that. Like, we've got a Hadron Collider in CERN area up in Europe, and that's a whole other conversation for after hours. But the other part of it is that it's probably the only thing that can replicate such an instance happening. So you would need something the size of a Hadron Collider on a ship. You know how huge, the
Hadron Collider literally has an entire, tract of land set aside for it in, where is it, Sweden?
Yeah.
This thing's, several miles wide and has, so many, yards of track inside it just so this damn thing can work, because of the amount of energy, space, etc., it takes just to make this thing work so they can do experiments. And being able to
need something like that on a ship. You know how bad a ship would be?
Yeah.
Be like the Infinity.
And at that point too, it's like the amount of thrust it would need, the amount of fuel it would need in order for that thing to move around, gets to the point of it's just not doable.
Yeah.
So that's that's some stuff is like, why is like, I tend to look at these things a little more skeptically, especially too with, like I said, with the whole ghost hunters thing. It's like when it starts saying like, oh look, it looks like they were attacked by a ghost at this point, but really you can see the strings if you look hard enough, and sure enough, there's the fucking strings. So it's like, okay, if this shit ain't real, and it's like, what else are people trying to, just
pull over on me?
Pull over on me. It's like, it's like the next one down the list was Santa Claus. It's like, oh no.
Yeah, right. So basically, like, TLDR, aliens are bullshit, ghosts are bullshit. Yeah. But hey, there might be an ape somewhere.
I think honestly, in another episode, if we want to talk about a ghost game, I think I could argue the existence of ghosts on a scientific-ish level.
Alright, well that's for another episode. We've pretty much gone through all of our bullet points here. Well, we told our stories, but we're already coming up on... Oh, we're past
twice as long as a normal episode.
Yep, so...
We're at... Yeah, but I mean, it's still fun to do.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think I had a lot of fun recording this, just because I love, like, as much
mean-
as I love talking about these stories, I also love talking about why they could not happen, because you,
And especially sometimes when you start talking about this stuff and you start thinking like if it's real, it's like some of the logistics involved behind it. It's like for instance, like, you know, Santa Claus being real. If you imagine if Santa Claus was real, he would be the most prolific criminal in existence.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Because he breaks into everyone's house in a single night. At some points, he vandalizes the socks of naughty kids.
Exactly, yes.
And he drinks their milk and cookies.
Yep.
I
And then
mean,
he just
man.
leaves gifts and then just bounces.
it's like, and it's like he's traveling, you know, violating all sorts of international laws. I mean, you can imagine the cop that catches Santa Claus would be set for life.
Man.
Sorry, that was a long.
No. I think that's a good place to end it, y'all. Santa Claus, most prolific criminal of all time. But that's everything we got tonight for KoR After Hours. Thank everybody for tuning in. If you like the show, please give us a rating and share it. It's the #1 way of helping us in the algorithm. If you like the show, you can follow the link to contribute, or you can follow us on Twitter at KoR Live 4589. You guys have a wonderful night now.
See ya.
See ya.